Hi, good evening, and welcome to Terrific Trees, Choosing Native Species, an Earth Day event with the Grange Park Sustainability Commission. My name is Kelly Burns. I'm a resident of the village and a huge tree hugger. By that, I mean that I've been thinking about trees ever since I can remember. And as my family always likes to say, it's always a walk in the woods with me. So being part of the Sustainability Commission, I thought that I would talk to you tonight about choosing some native species of trees and why native trees are important. Just a little bit of background about me. I work at the Morton Arboretum, and I have had jobs in the past where I've been working out in the woods, doing stuff ever since I was about 18 years old. I have had jobs working outside. So you could say that I've been working towards talking about trees my entire life, and I always love walking around our neighborhood and sharing any knowledge I can with our residents. So tonight I'd like to talk about what is a native tree, why should we choose native species. I'd like to give you some ideas on what some beneficial trees are and what some invasive or non-native trees are, and then especially some resources to help you pick a tree that you might want to plant in your yard. So I'm going to share a whole bunch of resources and links with you. If you have any questions tonight, please feel free to put them in the chat or wait until the very end of the program. I am going to allow time for some Q&A. So what is a native tree? Basically, a native tree or plant is one that has co-evolved over hundreds of thousands of years with other plants and animals in a specific area, a region of a country, or an ecosystem. So for example, here in our part of the state, it was predominantly either prairie land or our woodlands were mostly oak and hickory savannas. And we're in what's called a zone 5, meaning that the plants that grow here have a certain cold hardiness to them. You can take some plants that you would find in the state of Illinois, but they wouldn't necessarily be native to our region. So for instance, I think bald cypress is a fantastic tree that you would normally find in wetland, marshy areas, and it's predominantly found in the southern part of the state. But it wouldn't be found a lot in our areas unless it's in a wetland area. So that's an example of a native species that you would find in a particular habitat or region of our state. A non-native plant is one that was brought here from another country, such as the ginkgo tree that was brought here from Asia, or from another region, so like the Colorado blue spruce, for example. It's a spruce tree, grows perfectly well within our region, but it's normally found in Colorado. Non-native plants don't necessarily mean that they would hinder the growth of other plants or that it's harmful to other animals. It just means that it's something that wouldn't normally have been found here without human interference. Whereas something that's invasive is something that will spread naturally into our natural areas outside of our normal ranges, and it's due to human activity. The problem with invasive plants is that it outcompetes our other plants for the resources that it needs. So for instance, if you were to take a walk in the Bemis Woods right now or the Salt Creek Woods, you may see a bunch of low shrubs leafing out and turning green already. Most of that is honeysuckle. And those green leaves popping out will start to shade any saplings or any of our woodland wildflowers that are trying to grow. Those plants need sunlight, and by that invasive honeysuckle leafing out first, it kind of gathers up all that sunlight and the resources, and so outcompetes our native oak saplings and our native wildflowers like our bluebells. The thing with buckthorn is it takes up a lot of space underground. That's what makes it invasive. The root balls are really huge. And so if you're a person that's trying to get buckthorn out of your yard, you know that you may cut the top down, but that buckthorn continues to grow back year after year after year unless you're able to do something with that huge root ball. So that root ball takes up a lot of space underground, outcompeting our native plants for the moisture that gets down into our soil. So you can see there's a couple of examples of non-native plants that aren't invasive, but then there's a couple of examples of invasive plants on there also. The thing you need to know is that just because a plant is native doesn't mean that it's not invasive. So if you think of something like a silver maple that sends out all kinds of seeds, and those seeds, my kids call them helicopter seeds because they tend to twirl around in the air. They catch the wind and they can blow into our oak savannas and woodlands, and maples need a lot less sunlight to grow than our oak saplings do. So those maple seeds can start to become really invasive to our oak woodlands. So there's the difference between native, something that evolved here over time with our native plants and animals, and then non-native was brought here from another country, but it doesn't necessarily mean bad, but invasive are the ones that we really don't want. So why should we care? Why should we care if we have an invasive species, invasive tree that we want to plant, such as the silver maple, versus a non-invasive and native species? Well, our native plants, they already know the land. They're adapted to our climates. They're adapted to our cold winters, our hot summers, our wet springs. So once you've planted a native tree in your yard, and once you've established it over the first year or two with watering, you shouldn't have to do any more watering with that tree at all, unless it's an extremely drought summer, and those are pretty rare currently. So by not having to water it a lot, not having to put extra pesticides and fertilizers on it, you're saving yourself time, you're saving yourself money, you're conserving Earth's resources by putting a native plant in the native location where it's supposed to go, versus trying to force a plant from a region where it may not be adapted to grow and trying to have it grow here, and you'd have to spend a lot of time watering it, taking care of it, and fertilizing it. Our native trees also support a lot of native wildlife. This is one of my big things about why I like to plant native trees and native plants in my yard, is because I like to see our bees and our butterflies. I'm a big birder, so I love watching the birds that come to my yard. All the pictures at the top are animals or plants that would rely on our oak woodlands. Native oaks support over 500 species of caterpillars, which birds, especially chickadees, need to raise their young, whereas something like a ginkgo tree, which isn't invasive, but it's non-native, it comes from Asia. So our plants, our animals that have adapted to be here don't necessarily recognize a ginkgo tree, which is why ginkgos only support 5 species of caterpillar. You'll see that I mentioned the word Doug Talamay in there. He's a really big insect guy, and he's really big on teaching people how to pick the native plants to attract certain animals and certain bugs to your yard. His idea is that if you plant the right plant, it'll attract the right insects. The right insects will then attract the right birds, which will then attract other wildlife to your garden and to your yards also. And just out of curiosity, if you don't know, the picture on the right-hand side, that's an acorn weevil. One of my favorite things to look for when I'm walking in and looking for acorns in the forest. They live their entire lives reliant upon those acorns. There are also a whole lot of other animals that are reliant upon the acorns that fall in our oak woodlands. Turkey, deer, blue jay, of course, squirrel, chipmunks, mice, and all those would attract other things like owls that would like to feed on those mice and those little squirrels. Our native trees really improve our communities. You can see on the left-hand side that they clean our air, they help mitigate stormwater damage, they provide lots of shade, prevent soil erosion, they save taxpayer money. So if you've noticed in the spring and in the fall in our woodlands, there's a lot of burning that goes on. And that's our Forest Preserve District trying to control the invasive species. And what they're doing is they're burning out the buckthorn and the honeysuckle and pulling that garlic mustard to allow those oak saplings the best chance to grow. And that's a lot of time and money that's spent on controlling our invasive species. Worldwide, over $120 billion is spent trying to control invasive species. Some statistics about our urban canopy can be found through the Chicago Regional Tree Initiative website. I'm going to go through and click on that later when I come to some more of our resources. And I'll show you how to specifically look up your community's information on the Chicago Regional Tree Initiative website. They have some great, interesting information on there. So part 3, what are some beneficial trees and what are some invasive examples? So these are trees and shrubs that don't necessarily cause a problem if they're planted in our yard. Sometimes they might spread to other parts of our yard. So for instance, silver maples or Norway maples, when they create those samaras, those seeds, and they twirl in helicopters and they land in our gardens or in our flower beds, you'll typically about this time of the year start seeing all kinds of little maple saplings popping up. So, and you can pull those out yourself. So you can imagine it's not really a big deal in your yard, but imagine in our oak forests that are just down the street from us, how those maple saplings, those seeds getting in there could really start to turn what could be an oak woodland into more of a maple woodland. Some other invasive trees that I could mention here, it's silver maple, Norway maple, the Callery pear. Those used to be non-fertile seeds, but they can cross-pollinate with other pears, and then the seeds are spread very easily into our woodlands, and they can start to take over our woodlands there also. Burning bush, a lot of people like to plant this as a bush in their yard. It has a beautiful red color in the fall. The problem is, if you look at the picture on the bottom, second to the left, you can see the little red berry hanging off the bush there with the bright red leaves. Each one of those berries can contain over 100 seeds. And so when a bird goes to eat that berry and then they defecate it out, it can put a whole lot of seeds in the ground with nice little fertilizer that the bird just gave it. And so we have burning bush starting to take over our woodlands here in our area because it spreads so invasively and so easily. So I would encourage you, if you're going to think about a bush instead of a tree, to please try and stay away from our burning bush. I'll give you an example of some other bushes in just a minute that you can choose instead. Honeysuckle and buckthorn are probably our two biggest issues that we have with our woodlands and our invasive species. They were both brought over by Europeans because they made great hedgerows. The problem is that the berries on both the buckthorn and the honeysuckle have tons of seeds inside of them. And so the same thing with the burning bush, birds will come along, get those, and then they bring them to another area, and then they spread really, really easily. So you can see here some trees and shrubs that we consider invasive. Not all of them are non-native. For instance, the box elder is a native tree here to our state, but it's so invasive that we encourage people not to plant it. And mind you, these aren't all the invasive trees and shrubs. These are just a few that I thought I would mention to you. You can Google invasive trees and shrubs for the Chicagoland area. The Chicago Botanical Garden has a fantastic resource on their website where they kind of list their plants of concern. Here's some good native trees and shrubs that I would encourage you to think about planting in your yard or to maybe start noticing as you're walking through our woodlands. And I also kind of checked this list and crossed it with the list for plants that would be good for climate change. As we all know that we have a little bit of climate change coming here, and we're starting to have more wet springs, more dry summers, more extreme winters, and these are plants and bushes that are considered native to our specific area. They're beneficial to all kinds of animals and insects. And these are plants that will also be good for when, as the climate starts to warm up and we start to get more extreme weather. So you'll notice the picture on the left-hand side on the top. That's a picture of white oak acorns. Picture on the bottom left corner. That's what's known as an ironwood. Some people like me call it a hop hornbeam because the seeds resemble hops. This is known as an understory tree in most of our woodlands around here. So it grows pretty quickly, but it's very strong. The flowers on the hop hornbeam remind me of a beech tree. They're kind of nondescript, and they're green. They're hanging on the trees this time of the year. But the cool thing about the ironwood is that it's really resistant to pests. So it's a good one to think about planting. The picture next to that, on the just to the right of the ironwood, this is a button bush, and those seeds are really cool. So this bush can get to be pretty large if you let it. It grows pretty quickly. And then next to that, this one right here is an oak leaf hydrangea. So oak leaf hydrangea is the only native northern Illinois hydrangea that we have. So it's really well adapted to our climates here. It's not on my list, but I thought I would include a picture of it because I know a lot of people like to plant hydrangeas. So the oak leaf hydrangea is one of my favorites. Picture with the cedar waxwing bird eating the berries. That's a serviceberry tree. Beautiful tree when it flowers in the spring, and it has these berries that attract all kinds of birds to it. You'll see in a minute, I'm going to pull it up as one of our trees that we're going to look at to see what kind of birds it'll attract. And I'm going to use that as a resource here in just a minute. Great understory tree. If you are thinking about power lines, it's a good one to plant underneath taller power lines because it won't get really tall like an oak tree or a shagbark hickory will. And then if you're thinking about something that's a bigger bush and not necessarily a large tree, this is a bottle brush buckeye on the top right-hand side. And you can see those beautiful spike-like flowers that stick up. The bush gets really large. It can fill in quite a large area. And then a couple of my other favorite trees are the northern catalpa and tulip tree. But you're going to want to make sure that you're not planting these underneath any of the power lines because they're going to be very tall trees in 40 to 50 years from now, which is something that you have to think about, right? Trees take a long time to grow. So if you're going to go out and get a little tiny sapling, be prepared for it to take 20 years or so before you might get some beautiful flowers and seeds on it, depending on the species, right? If you want to invest a little bit more money, you can get a larger tree and it'll take you less time. But as my first slide said, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now. So, and finally, a word about the oaks, because I love oak trees. Like I said, it was the predominant tree in our woodlands and savannas here in this part of the state. So any of our oaks that you see listed at the top there, white oak, swamp oak, shingle, chinkapin, and red oak are all native. Hugely beneficial. Over 500 species of animals and insects rely on our oak trees for survival. So here's just a small, short example of some native trees and shrubs that you could choose to plant in your yard or in your garden. So part 4, probably the part that's going to be the most helpful to you are some resources to help you pick the right tree for your location. Always remember those abiotics. Those are those non-living things in our ecosystem. So the sunlight, the air, the water, the soil, and always remember the space. So if you take the first letter of all those abiotics, it spells the word laws: light, air, water, soil, and space. So always remember when you're planting a tree to follow the laws. You're going to want to make sure where you're planting the tree, is it going to receive enough water there? Does the soil stay soggy? Does it drain quickly? That's going to help you pick the particular species of tree that you need. Will it be in full sun, part sun, shade? Is it going to be underneath other canopy trees? What about underneath power lines? That'll help you also determine which tree you should pick. And make sure that you account for the mature size of the tree. I see this all the time where people might go out, for instance, and pick white pines, and then they plant the white pines only 5 to 6 feet apart from each other, not realizing that a mature white pine tree can grow over 40 feet tall and have a diameter of over 30 feet. And when you're planting, make sure you plant at the right time of the year. Usually that's in the fall, but it can vary with the species. So you're going to want to, once you've determined a tree that you want, you're going to want to look and see when's the best time that I should plant this. Dig the hole deep and wide enough. I say usually it's the 2x2 rule, meaning that you should dig the hole at least 2 to 3 times the size of the root ball, and you should dig it 2 to 3 inches less shallow than what the root ball is, with the idea that right where the root ball ends and the stem begins should be right where it's at ground level, so that when you're mulching, you're not burying that stem, but yet the root ball is protected. Which leads me to mulching. Mulching's there to retain moisture, and please don't volcano your mulch. By that I mean, I see this all the time where landscapers will take the mulch and they pile it up along the base of the tree, and it literally kind of looks like a volcano. That's really bad for the stem and the bark of your tree to have that wet mulch sitting against it the whole time. So definitely you can mulch out past the base of the tree, 2 to 3 times past where the tree trunk is, but make sure not to volcano mulch it. And make sure you water that tree until it's fully established. But then after that, if you've picked a native tree, you shouldn't have to worry about watering it anymore. Here are some helpful resources. They work by either entering your zip code, so you can click on the website, you can put in your zip code, and it will tell you specifically what native trees you should consider for your area. Or maybe you can put in the characteristics that you want for your tree. For instance, you want your tree, it's going to be in full sunlight, and you want it to have beautiful spring flowers, but yet edible fruit, and you want it to be native, and you have clay-like soil that doesn't drain very well. Where you can put in all of those characteristics, and it will also give you suggestions too. So for instance, I'm a big birder. I love birding. So if you ever see me walking around the woods and I'm looking up at the trees, that's what I'm doing, usually looking for the birds. So I'm going to click on this second website here, audubon.org. And what you can do is it gives you suggestions for trees to plant based on what bird species you would like to attract. So I'm going to scroll down here. Hopefully everybody can see this. You don't need to enter your email address unless you want them sending you information. You can simply put in your zip code. Hit search. And this is where we all sing the Jeopardy song for a minute. And then it pulls up some best results for our area. So let's just say I just want to look at just trees. This tells me, for instance, the serviceberry. This is the one that I had in the picture with the cedar waxwing a few minutes ago. It gives you a little bit of information about the serviceberry, what type of tree it is, what the flowers should look like. But then the information on the right-hand side tells you what types of birds that planting this tree would attract. So there's a whole list of them here. And so you can see there's about 18 different birds that planting just this one particular native tree would attract to your yard. You can scroll down and look at other ones also, so you can get an idea of how this website would help you not only pick native trees that would be good to plant in our particular area of the state, but also the different birds that it would attract. So if we go to something like, let's say you're like, okay, the serviceberry, that'd be great, but will it fit with the conditions that I have in my yard? You can go to something like the tree selector for the Morton Arboretum. And it allows you to input a bunch of characteristics about your site. So for instance, our site, if I was to pick it for my house, I'd say, okay, it's a residential area. Is it underneath utility lines? No, not this time, because I'm going to put it in my backyard. Let's say my backyard gets full sunlight and that I want a small tree. Let's say that I have poor drainage in my yard, and that for my tree, I would like it to have deciduous leaves, meaning that the tree decides to lose its leaves in the fall. It doesn't really decide, it's just an adaptation it has. But typically leaves are deciduous or evergreen, meaning they stay on year round. Would I prefer a tree that's native to Illinois? Yes, always. And then what are some features I would like? How about some like beautiful spring blossoms and maybe some fall color? And then if I hit submit, then their tree finder does the magic for me and recommends a number of different types of trees that would fit my particular site. And because I clicked native, it says it's native to our state, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's native to our region. So that's where you have to just do a little bit more investigating. So those are some great resources. I'm going to give you a minute to like take a screenshot of that if you want to. And then I would like to talk a little bit about some tree advice. I've had a number of people asking me lately about the spruce trees that we've been seeing in our neighborhood, where if you've noticed, they've been starting to lose the needles, the leaves from the top of the spruce trees instead of at the bottom. And that is a problem. There's a fungus and a couple of other pests that are attacking some of our native trees and also some of our non-natives, like the Norway spruces and the Colorado blue spruces. So anytime that you see something weird going on with the plants or the trees in your yard or in your neighborhood, feel free to contact the Morton Arboretum's Plant Clinic. They're a free resource that's here for the communities to help them determine what may or may not be going on with their trees or their plants in their yard. You can always email them at plantclinic@mortonarb.org, or you can go on their website, which is right here, and or you can Google Morton Arboretum Plant Clinic and it'll pop it up for you, and you can email them and they usually get back to you within a short amount of time. They're a fantastic free resource. I use them all the time. So, and then the last thing I wanted to point out was that Chicago Regional Tree Initiative website. And this is where I look around just for fun, because like I said, I'm a big tree hugger. So one of the more interesting things on their website, what the Chicago Regional Tree Initiative does is they work with communities to get the data about what kind of trees are in our community, what's the percentage of the canopy cover. It talks about invasive species in there, and then it also talks about the huge benefits that trees give us money-wise and also health-wise. But then on their interactive canopy map on the right-hand side, if you click on that, you can actually zoom into specific communities. And we can zoom into Grange Park. Oops, that was Addison. Hold on here just a second. Let me zoom in a little bit, and then we can actually find out some great information about just our community. There's Brookfield, Bemis, Grange Park. And so if you want some fun and light and interesting reading, I highly encourage going to the Chicago Regional Tree Initiative website, and it can tell you all about Grange Park's urban forestry with summary information, pictures about what kind of trees we have and which ones are natives and, you know, which types of land are covered the most with trees, etc. So it's really some very interesting information, I think. And they like to partner with communities, not on just finding out about the science, but also getting communities to plant more native trees. So that's about all that I forgot to mention apps for phones. There are several apps that you can use for your phone for free that can help with plant ID. So if you're walking through the neighborhood and you see a neighbor's tree that you really like, but you're not sure what it is, either Plant Snap or iNaturalist are great apps that you can have for your phone. All you have to do is download them onto your phone. They're completely free, like I said. And what you can do is you can walk up to that tree and you can take a picture of it. And then iNaturalist or Plant Snap will give you suggestions on which tree they think it is. And so then you can be like, oh, my neighbor had a great, beautiful tree. Turns out that it's a serviceberry. Maybe I would like to plant that in my yard. So that's about all I had. Are there any questions for me at all? And I hope that you at least got a little bit of information or a resource that you can take back with you.
Hi, Kelly. It's Rick. I got one piece of advice that I'd like to share. That's with the Chicago Region Tree app or website that, you know, every year they ask us for our information, and our inventory that we currently have is very old. It's like 14, 15 years old. So the reason why I wanted to mention that is that later on this summer, when we get our new tree inventory completed, we will upload that information to their website. So ours will be a little bit more current.
Cool.
And then the question I have for you, this is going to put your thinking cap on. You know, our community was very well known in its glory days for the American elm, which we don't have too many left. We still have a few, but we're starting to see those even starting to decline with Dutch elm. I'm just curious on, you know, the Morton Arboretum's take, or if you've heard anything about communities possibly starting to replant the American elm, thinking that maybe the Dutch elm has run its cycle. Have you heard anything like that, or any insight you'd like to share by chance?
I haven't heard anything about people replanting the American elm. I do know the Accolade elm is one that is suggested to be planted, even though it's technically not native to our area. That's one that's resistant to the Dutch elm disease. It's called the Accolade elm. Yeah. So I don't know specifically about the American elm. So, and I do know that with the ash trees too, and I want to speak a minute about the ash trees, because we've lost a lot of ash trees due to the emerald ash borer. And so, which is a beetle that came over from Asia, right? And so since the beetle came from Asia, our native ash trees didn't have any natural resistance to the EAB, the emerald ash borer. However, the ash trees over in Asia do have a resistance to this beetle. And so there's a bunch of scientists worldwide right now working on trying to figure out what is the genetic resistance in the Asian ash trees that's missing within our American ash trees. And they're hoping to try to maybe find a way to genetically mix the two and hopefully bring some ashes back. Of course, that's down the pipeline, but it's something that's being worked on right now. So
great. We have one person that came on and joined us, Renew. I hope I pronounced that correctly. She has a question. Is there a way to get the list of all the websites you showed? We are going to be posting this to our village website, and then underneath the Sustainability Commission page, we will have this presentation that was recorded that'll be live on there, as well as the actual slides, so then you can go and pull up those resources then, okay?
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks. That'll be very helpful.
We appreciate you joining.
Yeah, I was 20 minutes late, I forgot, but I think you have another session some days later. Is that the same session?
No, that'll be a different session that's on recycling.
Oh, okay. So I kind of missed 20 minutes, but that's okay. Since you're going to be posting it, I'll read it. It's really, yeah, very, very, very useful. It's the right time for this presentation. Spring is here and we're all thinking about garden and yards and everything. So thank you very much.
you're welcome. Yeah, I was thinking about maybe doing another one of these in the summer about how to ID some trees too. Might be helpful for people. So
I think once a month, Kelly.
you know, honestly, I would love to talk about trees every day. So
We can tell.
well, that's all I had. If you guys don't have any other questions for me, just join us next week for information on zero waste. So
Thank you so much. It was really excellent.
That was great. Awesome presentation, Kelly.
thanks.
Thanks, Kelly.
You're making me work hard.
Anytime I can educate people on trees, it's a good day for me. So
Thanks a lot.
thank you.